cool. Okay, that's good. I'm glad to know about that. Yeah, I've cut myself on more than one occasion using the conventional.
No cuts from this at all. I recommend it.
Thank you. Now, if I can do eyebrows as well, that I've got to. That's the next friend.
All right, well, welcome back to our next panel. This special panel, entitled Breaking News for Higher Education, is a conversation with some of the national leaders working in this country to reform, to improve upon, to otherwise continue that great tradition that we've been talking about this week, to bring liberal education to the next generation. And I'm really pleased to have each of these gentlemen with me, for they represent different facets of the higher educational apparatus. They have seen different sides of it, different levels of experience and encounter with the various disciplines, with the quality of instruction.
Real privilege to be here with this wonderful organization. I should start by saying that we were founded in 1995, and we now think we should hang a large banner out our window on M Street in Washington saying, "We told you so," that we would see skyrocketing prices, we would see academic standards bottoming out, and we would see a stifling of freedom of expression on campus. And so we work on the 3 A's: academic freedom, academic standards, and accountability. And I want to share already some signs of hope. Starting with academic freedom, we launched the Campus Freedom Initiative just this last year. Our first 3 schools were University of Texas at Austin, MIT, and Cornell. And we have seen some breakthroughs. Now, correlation is not cause, but remarkably, a few weeks after we put a nasty op-ed into the Dallas Morning News, the Board of Regents of Texas unanimously adopted a statement of freedom of expression. They got a long way to go, but we will take that progress where we can. We have been fighting very hard to see the implementation of a real United States history requirement. Our What Will They Learn survey that we do every year shows only 18% of the schools. But we've seen demonstration instead of instruction. But if I may, for this audience, I particularly recommend looking at our site, What Will They Learn? It's a free website where you can see, as your children or, well, I guess children, grandchildren are choosing colleges, which are the ones that have a disciplined core curriculum? Which are the ones that have hidden gems of wonderful programs that advance the liberal arts, great books, and entrepreneurship that are so often services?
My college now served 15 years of a scholar and
Of scholars founded in the 80s with the fond hope that calling academics back to duties in all it take to resist the of higher education. That hypothesis proved to be dead wrong. Not all academics going around. There are, I think, the public about are producing to get it passed. Making progress with that as well. I think I'll leave it at that.
is the Mises Institute, but then one of the colleagues here at Greathearts. This is fantastic. You met the. Tell us a little bit about.
Well, I got the oldest of the because the Mises Institute was founded in 19. We saw the 40th anniversary right here in Phoenix back in October. The Institute for those 4 years has collected private donations, no money from government. We use that to help students that is in economics. The Austrian, unfamiliar, was out there for 40 years, and pretty, but it's given what they've the universities and others spend money to create our own with the thing they call we figure create our own graduate program, which we
done. And those three components of the curriculum are intellectual foundations, which is our core liberal studies program for all freshmen and sophomores, our centers of academic inquiry, of which we have 4, and I think probably the most distinctive part of our curriculum, which is something called the Polaris Project. So the idea is that UATX really works on a sort of sets of, let's say, fruitful tensions. One of them being tradition and innovation. I think it's our firm belief that innovation without tradition is blind. Tradition without innovation is sterile, but tradition is the soil from which all new growths spring. And without a knowledge of the tradition, I don't think one can be a flourishing human being. And how does one develop a conception of what flourishing is, or what the human good is, or what a human being is? Well, that's by studying the tradition. So Intellectual Foundations is about 15, 16 courses that read Homer and Euclid and Genesis and Exodus and the Gospel of John and Ibn Tufayl and Confucius, you know, and Flannery O'Connor and Frederick Douglass and Shakespeare, and I could go on, asking fundamental questions like, what's the beginning of civilization? What is politics? Why does it matter? What makes us modern? What's technology? What's ideology? What does ideology do to politics and morality? Etc., right? And then students are prepared after this robust curriculum to enter our centers of academic inquiry, arts and letters, science, technology, engineering, and math, economics, politics, and history, or education and public service. And they'll have all these multiple Velcro hooks to grab onto any kind of new intellectual content. But it's not enough for them to just have then that specialized education, which will help them to develop personally and professionally and give them 21st century skills. It's important for them to know how to do things and how to not only open themselves to reality, but work with reality, right? Act in it, shape it, make it, build it. So the Polaris projects are projects, 4-year projects, to make, do, discover, build something that meets a human need, for which, by the robust concept, connects with who will serve as mentors and give our students apprenticeships. They'll go out into the real world, they'll formulate goals, they'll formulate means, they'll fail, they'll try, they'll fail again, they'll fail better. They'll learn fundamental skills that will prepare them for jobs. They'll learn virtues like prudence and actually courage and resilience and humility through this kind of process. So that's a brief sketch of what we're up to at UATX.
Thank you for that. Last but not least, Dr. Matthew Smith, the president and founder of a new entry, as I've called it, Hildegard College. You want to tell us what distinguishes the new entry?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Hildegard College is a brand new Christian liberal arts college in Southern California, in Costa Mesa, that combines a curriculum in great texts with a minor in entrepreneurship. So my own background is in conventional higher education, and I taught for about 15 years in public and private and religious and secular universities, and one thing that I learned is that they were all mostly the same in almost every meaningful way, and those similarities weren't things that I was proud of. And so there tend to be 2 schools of thought in higher education when you see a need for change. One is a school that says higher education is adaptable, we can pivot, we can take what we have and change. The other perspective says that the oil tanker is too weighted down to course correct in time, and we'd be better off tearing it down and building something new. We're of the latter category, and I'm actually take some kind of delight in thinking originally that we were the first school that combined a great text curriculum with a practical making something curriculum until we found out in the same year that we were founded, the University of Austin is also being founded. And so I believe this is something of a movement. And our program is similar in some ways. It's a liberal arts curriculum. Students study the greatest works of economics, politics, theology, literature, philosophy, the natural sciences, mathematics from antiquity to the present. Along in primary text discussions, what is the book, art, what that inspiration, and as curriculum to what project, fashion entrepreneur, not an as for instance, our think St. we aim to graduate polymath, so we culminate our experience in a year-long polymath project, kind of an applied thesis, often done or performed in partnership with our civic partners, leaders from outside organizations that come alongside students and are eager to work with them. And I'll just say, I'm sure these civic folks from other organizations, people are eager undergrads, really educated, think critically, sense of the waiting in the wings. So, if there's a move, I'm be joining colleagues here.
I've heard from the beginning with Michael, the three institutions represented here, seeing good work, prosper. But I do sure to have any cause for when we look at education, right? Education nationally, what should we be concerned about today?
Go ahead, Peter.
Enrollments have dropped by well over 1 million in the last decade. The COVID fiasco accelerated that. The higher education convinced itself there would be a bounce back. There has been only a little bounce back, and a survey just completed by the Chronicle of Higher Education shows that about half of American colleges lost 10% or more of their students just in the last 2 years. And they're not bouncing back. We've seen an accelerating collapse of institutions that are going into bankruptcy or merging out of existence. And we have, I think, at a much deeper level, a growing distrust of American higher education by the general public, which has taken account of what's going on campus and says, no, thank you. My own view is that take all the good colleges and universities, the ones that have decent curricula and are not really aiming at turning their students against America, you probably have space for at most 20,000 students in a country where the total college enrollments, even after this decline, is 18 million. So we're talking about a drop in the bucket. Well, a drop in the bucket is still a drop in the bucket. It's better than nothing, but we're not looking at a situation here where American higher education is headed in anything like a positive direction. I forbore giving an account of the sorts of things the National Association of Scholars is working on, but one of them, for example, is the infiltration of the Chinese Communist Party into American higher education, met with open arms by most colleges and universities. See nothing wrong with having agents of the Chinese government on campus recruiting their faculty and presenting propaganda to their students. That's one of many such instances of misallocation of resources and misuse of the trust of the American people. We are living in an era in which most Americans have experienced a great disruption in their lives by the COVID shutdown. And who was more complicit in that than American higher education, who shut down their campuses and sent their students home for what we now know were no legitimate medical reasons? None. And yet, this is the institution in which we should be trusting our children with their safekeeping as well as their education, when they seem to be as intent on joining up with the American elite to misuse American people. So I'm going to be the voice on this panel of not gloom and doom, because I think there are alternatives to the forms of higher education that we've grown used to, and two of those alternatives, or maybe three, are represented right on this panel. But taking in the big picture, we're in the midst of a disruption of the way Americans have conducted higher education for the past several centuries, and Western civilization has conducted it for this past several thousand years, a kind of deep disruption that is going to lead nowhere good.
Please, Jacob.
Yeah, I just want to say a word or two about the student experience, too. Look, I mean, what's happened now is, first of all, students are intimidated. They are afraid to speak up. You can't have dialogue. So how do you learn if you can't make mistakes and you can't share your opinions? The second thing is, the universities have really gone nuts. I mean, there's sort of a progressive loss of contact with reality. That's actually came up in an earlier session where somebody was talking about how students, you know, are engaged with a sort of simulacrum of reality, right? And they don't experience this loss of reality. We happen to believe at UATX that the human being, the human soul, needs to be open to reality and have contact with reality, and that's part of our fulfillment. But really the most horrible thing for me is the loss of joy in learning. And one of the great things about what you guys are doing with your classical academies and your Christian academies is restoring joy in learning. The pleasure that students get from encountering a text, and with, you know, humility and with a sense that there's something there that they might learn, not bringing a bunch of theoretical presuppositions, but listening to it and engaging with it. That is being taken away. I recently spoke to an educator in Massachusetts who said that K through 12 sucks the soul out of the students. That's not how it should be. And that needs to be corrected.
Well, thank you. Michael.
I guess we'll have both the laughing philosopher and the weeping philosopher here side by side. But I want to share some thoughts. Maybe I'll take a little comfort from. Oh, sorry.
It's a musical thought.
Yes. Technology bad. Take a little comfort from T.S. Eliot, virtue is thrust upon us by our impudent crimes. I do sense a certain inflection that I think we can build on, and I'm seeing some signs of it. ACTA teamed up with Braver Angels and Bridge USA. We've now held 115 campus debates on topics like defunding the police, Confederate monuments, universal health care, all the really hot-button issues, the Portland riots. And the thing that I take so much pleasure in, I've watched a number of them, there's never been an example of incivility when students take up pro and con on these debates that so often have adults throwing things at each other. In other words, I think there are ways that we can turn things around. Paul Carisse, I'm going to take one of his lines. He'd like to see 10 more Skittles in the next 10 years. And it's happening. The Board of Trustees of University of North Carolina voted unanimously to start a program much like Skittle. And of course, the accreditor is having a meltdown over it. We're going to fight back against the accreditor. We're seeing this in Tennessee, where Governor Lee said, I want an institute devoted to informed patriotism. Politics is downstream from culture, and we're paying a price for the failures in culture, and higher education is absolutely complicit in all of that. But I do see these signs of turnaround, of hope. Some of them will come from state legislatures. Some of them will come from boards of trustees that have the insight and the guts to stand up to the minority of angry faculty who will oppose them. It's going to take some courage. It's going to take patience.
And your organization, just for the audience's sake, is trying to corral or gather and influence those alumni of these institutions of higher education who are donors and givers and in some sense very much an extension of that institution, but also the trustees who have a fiduciary responsibility to bring direction and orientation to the colleges. And so you are working, in a sense, to try to influence top down, so to speak. I'd also like to hear, and if I may, just turn to you for a moment, Matthew, what a bottom-up development looks like, because it sounds as though Hildegard was born out of fellow faculty members saying, we could do better.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Not just faculty members, but also business people, folks in ministry, folks in the community. And I'm, sometimes the way I think about it in my mind, at least biographically, this is how many of us were inspired to get involved founding a college, is, yes, we see these symptoms that my colleagues here are noticing, suppression of free expression on campus, lowering academic standards, and so forth. But institutionally, what kinds of questions are we asking? What's the public looking to universities for? And it's become clear to me, and it had in the past, that universities are not designed to do the things for which the public is looking to them. So it is, for instance, surrogating or trying to do things that other institutions can do better, institutions like the church, the family, the town hall, the workplace, for that matter. And yet, universities, multiversities, are kind of trying to be everything all at once. And so what, the conviction that landed upon those of us involved with starting Hildegard College was simply a desire to have a school that could be clear about what it teaches and what kind of people it's trying to form. And as I often say to parents, and this is almost a confusing statement to make, if you were to ask an average faculty member at an average university, mainstream university, what does your school teach? The question is just incomprehensible. It doesn't make any sense. What kind of person is your school designed to create? Well, there might be trends. We might be able to see things, but it's almost an embarrassing question because it just almost infinitely depends. And so we're, in terms of signs of hope and what we're seeing and what motivates us, we're motivated by being able to, with utter clarity and conviction, say we're here to form students for lives of faith, virtue, and extraordinary work by reading these people, by asking these big questions. No caveats involved.
Right. Joseph, as you look at the landscape, and again, with an institution that's been around for a little while, you've decided to open a graduate institute, even though, again, you had an institute with the activities of which were quite, as you said, influential and helpful. But why did you decide to go into formal higher ed with the Graduate Institute?
Well, I guess we're part of the We Told You So group. It's not surprising. As an economist, when you remove who's paying for something with who's getting the result, and then you've got no market test for employment, you wind up with schools teaching things that are being funded by, government that are not really responsive to what's really needed. So yes, we were influential, but we think we can be even more influential. We've taken diverted some of the funds that were used to send people to what we would consider, inferior schools, the schools we described as problematic. And, this allows us to provide, we think, a great master's degree in a school of thought that no one else, there's no other, purely Austrian school programs taught in English, and we do it for the graduate student for out of pocket for less than $5,000. So if we can do it, with not a lot of experience in creating our own school, we're convinced that there's opportunities for other programs to teach maybe similar things, although we think we're perfectly situated to do the narrow thing that we're doing.
I appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit, right, that's represented here. And we need both those who can identify or diagnose what's wrong with higher education, but we definitely need those who can bring the therapy or the recovery. And at the same time, we have to give advice and counsel. Those of us working with K-12 students and essentially preparing them for graduation, we have families that will be looking to us and to others to find their way, to make their way, to navigate these seemingly treacherous waters of higher education. What advice do you have? If you could put it as pithily as possible. I'm going to start right down there on that, and we're going to walk right down because we've got an audience listening. We'll take some questions right after this, straight from the parents themselves, I suspect. But what would you say to parents in terms of how they should begin this process to discerningly choose a college for their child?
I'll take that line from Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, choose wisely. And that does not mean this school with the best football team or basketball team or the biggest climbing wall or all the other foolish things that schools tout when you go on a campus tour. The tool that we created about 14 years ago called What Will They Learn, which is available online, will allow the user to compare schools' core curricula to see whether they have special programs, which we called oases of excellence, like the Skettle program, and to make discerning choices. I can put it in a phrase: if a school has not come together as a faculty to determine what are the things that constitute a college-educated individual, then it is a dysfunctional institution. And by that I include my own alma mater, Yale University. That there are many schools that do a fantastic job at often a much lower cost. In fact, we rate schools A through F, and we find that they, among the A schools, they tend to be lower in cost and far higher in their academic integrity, in saying that you don't leave these walls if you haven't taken these fundamental foundational courses. So choose wisely.
Thank you. Peter?
I'll be simpler, don't go. Of course, if you happen to be raising a child who is a polymath and loves to read and has already achieved intellectual maturity by the age 18, you can probably find a college worth going to. It may be one of these. But for the most part, what you will find is colleges that have diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI requirements built in, not just to the humanities course, but now in the hard sciences everywhere. You will find colleges that take their commitment to fighting climate change as more serious than any other intellectual activity. You'll find colleges in which the presidents have declared that their institutions are systemically racist and always have been, and that it's the job of the students now on campus to atone for the sins of past generations. You will find colleges that have adopted every fad going and consider that the most innocent remarks that your child may make will be considered harm done to other students who are somehow so fragile and vulnerable that they cannot bear to hear an opinion they disagree with. That is the pervasive situation in higher education. To send your child into that arena is akin to child abuse. You will be sacrificing your child's mental health and practical future for the vanity of thinking you're doing a good thing in your child raising. You will not be. Maybe you will be if you send your child to ATX or to Hildegard. I don't know. These are worthy experiments not yet run, but the options available to you to find colleges that pass the test of having none of those things that I just listed will produce you a list of close to zero.
Joseph?
I think, you know, the internet is handy, but it's not probably going to do the whole job. As I think about this, and I hadn't thought that much about it before, but I think the burden might be on the people in this room, because they're the ones teaching the K through 12, right, to a large extent. And it seems to me that no one's probably better suited to inform students and parents about selecting the right higher education program than the people here that are that understand why we're here. I mean, the Mises Institute is starting to expand its programs into K through 12, some homeschool programs and some other things that we're developing and are pretty close to launching. But it just seems to me that it's the people in this room that are going to be best suited to provide the information that makes choosing the right higher education system for students.
Thank you. Jacob?
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, one suggestion is, speaking of the internet, if you go to a university website, you can learn a lot. So I would suggest that you start with websites of universities or colleges, like Hillsdale College. You look at their website and you know within 30 seconds what they're all about, right? They are explicit about what they believe in, what they think is important in an education, and what kind of character they're trying to mold. I would add Hildegard College. I am extremely impressed with their website. Same thing. You're not going to be mistaken about what you're going to get when you look at that. The people in this room are committed to liberal education. Is that front and center? So let me just put it this way. Let's say you look at Hillsdale, you look at Hildegard. University of Dallas, I haven't looked at recently, but I would guess you're going to see certain signals there as well. I'm naming schools that are definitely committed to the kind of education, broadly speaking, that the people in this room value. Wyoming Catholic, another school, right? There's some interesting schools like Deep Springs College you might take a look at. But once you look at those good schools, then go look at schools, other kinds of schools, and see what you see on their website. Do they talk about, this is the kind of character we're trying to form? Do they talk about, this is the liberal education we're offering? Now, they may use buzzwords. They all do. Human flourishing, stuff like I was talking about earlier. You know, we build virtue and human flourishing. I don't know if they say virtue. But if their website is full of pictures of kids having fun on climbing walls, or clearly selected to represent a kind of diversity, or stories about all kinds of, you know, political, you know, people working in political fads and so forth, that's not for you, right? And then you want to ask yourself, so is my student going to develop further in terms of getting a broad vision, seeing things whole, being able to discern signal from noise and so forth? But also, are they going to get some skills? Are they going to get something that's going to allow them to go into the 21st century and get a job, right, and have some kind of meaningful career? And if you don't find clear evidence of that, don't go there.
Yeah, well put. I'll just offer two practical litmus tests that, in my opinion, a teacher and educator can use to help guide students in what colleges they might consider. And one is, this is a bit in the weeds, but one is, what is the general education at that school like? Do they have a common curriculum? Is it something, do they have something like the Templeton Honors College at Eastern, the Torrey Honors College at Biola? Does that exist? And even better, and I think to your point, even better, does the school have that common curriculum required of all students? That takes an extra level of commitment. And many of the startup colleges that you see these days have an entirely common curriculum, at least to at least in those kind of fundamental ways. And the other litmus test, this is a little bit exclusive, but while it might exclude some schools, the schools that are included in this are going to typically be good bets, or look at schools that don't accept federal money. So schools that don't play that federal funding game, it's more insidious, I think, than a lot of people realize, and I think it's definitely worth considering how much of a school's tuition revenue, how much of their income comes from the government.
Yeah, that's good, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out that while most of this audience is made up of K-12 educators, a full 10% are, like many of you, coming to us from higher education to inform us of their offerings, and they're more than just the three here on the stage. There are at least 17 over there. So, Peter, I must instruct you, if I may, to just take a look. There are signs of hope, and if you weren't aware. I would like to open it up for questions, either to the virtual audience or to anybody who's in the room. If you could get to a microphone, there's one right down front here in this room. If you're interested in offering a question to these gentlemen, be happy to take it. And I think I have somebody coming up here. And then I'll check the virtual and see what we've got.
so it's taken me a while to get up here. Thanks for that. It's really interesting. And it's not that, well, it's not that I'm disagreeing with what you're saying, because everything you're saying absolutely just at the end there. But the thing is, like when you say don't go to university, that is kind of ridiculous. The reason why I say it's kind of ridiculous is that, like, my kids at school, like, their only path to social mobility and making something of their lives is getting to a university. You will have heard of, possibly, here in the US, Andrew Gutman, who is a dad in New York. Barry Weiss made his letter famous by posting his letter where he removed his daughter from Brearley, the private girls' school in New York. And she made his letter famous, and it was this beautifully written long letter about how outraged he was with the way they treat race and so on, how woke it was. And he removed his daughter, and then he subsequently spent all this time going all over the United States looking for a school to be able to send his daughter, a private school, because charter schools are impossible to get into, et cetera, et cetera. So he couldn't find anything. Eventually moved to Florida with her, put her in a school. Now the school was, it was good on the woke front, but it didn't really push her academically. Now, when it comes to schooling at high school level, I can understand somebody like him, you know, trying to find something different. What was interesting was that when I said to him, oh, well, you know, what about the other parents? He said, look, I've tried to convince the other parents of Brearley to say something. I've tried to, he said, they don't care. And the reason they don't care is what they want is for their child to get to Princeton, Harvard, or Yale. And as long as they're getting there, that's all that matters. And yeah, it's woke. They try and do their best to inoculate their kid. But at the end of the day, if they don't get the degree from Harvard, Princeton, or Yale, then they're not going to get the job as the CEO of whatever in some bank. So that's what matters to people, whether they're rich, like the people he's talking about, or poor, like my kids. All of us want the brightest kids to be able to get to university because that's what makes you have a life. Now, you're going to say, no, that's not what life's about, et cetera, and you're going to speak very eloquently about deeper matters of meaning. But, you know, let's be serious. And, like, how can you say to people, just don't go, is essentially what I'm asking.
Well, you started this train, Peter, so.
My answer is ha. I know lots of people who haven't gone to college and have been very successful. A fair number of them are black. It's not impossible to succeed, in this country at least, without a college education. Does it take a certain amount of grit? Sure it does, but success after college with a college degree takes a certain amount of grit as well. I think if your school and schools like it are doing this classical education well, you will be graduating students who will make their way in the world without this. Now, that's not to say I don't recognize the dilemma that you point to. It's a dilemma both at the individual level. It's much, much harder for an 18 or 17-year-old to say, I'm going to go out into the world and make my way, than it is to say, well, I know the logical next step is to go to college, and there I get the experience as well as the education, and I get a credential. The fact is that that credential is increasingly worth very little in the marketplace. The companies have begun to recognize that someone with a college degree, even if it's from Harvard or Yale, doesn't mean very much. They haven't learned anything. Thank you for your reports on that. The truth of this is that these legacy institutions are the source by which our society is currently structured to replenish its elites. Yes, those are the people who will go on to smooth transition to law school. They'll enter into good jobs in government. Our future bureaucrats will be the college educated. They will not be the people who make a society run. They won't be the great innovators of our time and place. As if we're talking about things that are hard to learn, like advanced work in the sciences, there's an answer to that too. You can apprentice yourself to a good scientist and learn a lot more science than you will in a university lab. I could go on about this, but that's my answer.
Okay.
I would take a more hybrid position. I mean, I agree with almost everything he said, but there's some merit in shifting the demand away from the schools that are doing really poorly. I mean, we started a school, right? We don't want to discourage people from coming to the school we started. I think I share
Speak
the
for your
opinion
colleagues here. That's
yes,
right. That's
to my right. But I mean, the whole idea of the market process, if students are demanding things that maybe the old names aren't providing, that's a healthy thing. It's shifting demand and creating opportunities for schools such as ours to do what we think needs to be done.
Right. Michael?
You've asked a really, really important question. I would like to see American higher education get back to being indisputably what it once was, which is the envy of the world. That those great laboratories, those institutes that have produced the life-saving devices that we have will continue to be supported and to turn out a new generation of leaders. We've got a lot of work to do to turn this around. But Peter, there's another kind of grit, which is for the student who's come out of your homes and your schools, who has the internal fortitude to resist the corrupt culture, to join with other students. And we have seen this. And sometimes we have even seen them get great lawyers to defend them and to grow that way in building a real culture on their campus of freedom and intellectual seriousness while taking advantage of those extraordinary libraries and laboratories and facilities. And the fact is, I think the Ivies are probably going to be really, really hard to remedy, but the Ivies are a silly little tail on a really great dog. And we shouldn't think that graduating from a fine state university or a fine liberal arts college is something other than a great advantage.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
You have another question? Please.
I do, thank you. Jason Porch with Tulsa Classical Academy. We're opening the first Hillsdale member school, charter school in Oklahoma. Thank you for your presentation today. This is when I talk to parents about college, I tell them about some changes that I'm seeing. Honors programs that are always core text programs, they're seminar based, right? And then the CLT, and then K through 16 or K college programs that are popping up. I'm kind of curious, just in terms of those three elements that we're seeing happen all across the nation, honors programs, complete change to college entrance, and the kinds of customers colleges are looking for because of the rise of homeschool, classically K-12 educated students that write home after the first year say, when is college starting because it's so boring, right? What do you think about those three elements happening all across the nation right now?
And Joseph, can I go straight to The Economist? I mean, that is your area. If that's what the market demands, at least some segment of.
Right, and he sort of reinforced my point of earlier that this is how good colleges can be found by people like the gentleman who's asking the question.
And it sounds like you already, like you have identified Great Books Honors Core, the CLT, which if you go to the CLT Classic Learning Test website and look at their drop-down menu of schools, it's probably the best online resource I know for schools to consider.
It's a good indicator.
Yeah, exactly right. I will say that there is the movement I referred to that I think is happening right now is a movement at the same time of building anew. So there's some adaptation happening. You can find great honors colleges at schools, but that school is still probably going to cost $50,000 a year. That university is still going to shuffle you into a major that's going to be disintegrated from your core curriculum. That has an effect on the way your mind will work as a young person. That school's still going to be overly reliant probably on federal funds, which will compromise the way it can make decisions for the sake of students. So there are some really key distinctions. I will say that I've found that teachers and schools are often not all that quick to recommend specific schools wholesale. I hope this changes, especially in the classical school world. There are schools that align missionally with the classical education movement and schools that don't, and I'm looking forward to leaders like yourself who are willing to say, these are schools we commend, these are some that we don't.
Peter?
Yeah, well, I can't miss an opportunity to put in another negative word. I think it's great that you are looking at the curricula of these colleges, and that's clearly where to begin. But remember that college is also sold to students now for, quote, experience. And what they mean by experience is immersing students in a campus culture in which they will be trained from the get-go into, at the very least, deep skepticism about the worthiness of their country. They will be bent towards a kind of enforced conformity to views on same-sex marriage, climate change, whatever the topic of the day might be, and resistance to those views will be met with social ostracism, so that they will either conform or they will be miserable. And that's not easily registered just by looking at the college catalog or the view book or talking to the recruitment officials. It's invisible unless you actually spend some time on campus talking to students. I was at dinner Friday last week with 7 faculty members from a well-respected, highly kind of intellectually rigorous liberal arts college. Every single one of them came out with long stories about how terrible their lives were on campus because they were being bullied by the administrators to do this, that, and the other thing. And that went on for the whole evening until we got to dessert. And for dessert, we learned that not a single one of them was willing to speak up for fear of what would happen to them if they did. So I think that understanding that there's more going on at these colleges than you will ever find by looking at the numbers, the courses, I think is really an important part of this.
Michael?
I just want to give a shout out to somebody who I think is in the room. Governor DeSantis just put 6 people onto the board of New College of Florida, which was a disgrace. 56 cents on our website that we analyzed, spent on administration for every dollar spent on instruction, a curriculum that was ludicrous. And with the new trustees on that board, it is going to be a very different college. In Virginia, Governor Youngkin has sent out the word that he wants to see more intellectual diversity in faculty hiring. How and whether that will happen, of course, remains to be seen. But as I said before, politics is downstream from culture, and we have been, as a society, rather asleep at the switch. But this can be turned around, and it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take alumni who are going to stop writing blank checks to the alma mater because 40 years ago it was a great place. It's not a great place anymore. And they can use their dollars and their influence well. This is what the Alumni Free Speech Alliance is all about, and it's building a lot of momentum. So my takeaway is don't give up. Never, never, never give up. We can't give up.
I want to thank all 5 of my panelists for this time. I know the words were a little stark, perhaps a little dire at times. I would have expected a group of liberally educated men to go back and forth and to have some difference of opinion, so that's healthy. But I do detect signs of hope. But buyer beware. Thank you very much.